Welcome to Learning Python with Turtle, Lesson 6. In the previous two lessons, we saw how we could use the for loop to repeat instructions in order to produce a polygon or a pattern. In this video, we're going to take a deeper dive into what the loop variable is actually doing in the for loop. And we're going to see how we can incorporate that loop variable as part of our design. So let's get to it. So again, just as review, one of the nice things about the for loop is that it allowed us to repeat instructions. So for instance, in this example, we could request, based on the number of sides, for these two instructions to repeat it 4 times. And then the angle is adjusted through some mathematical operations. And again, we could go as far as we want in terms of the number of sides. But to take it a little bit more away from the polygon so you don't think that the for loop is only used to produce polygon shapes, it's really used to repeat any set of instructions. And in this case, we have a very distinct pattern, forward, right, circle, forward, left. And then that pattern gets repeated 4 times, which then produces this. Again, the strength of being able to repeat commands is powerful. And then to be able to simply modify a certain part of it and then have the for loop repeat that modification, again, it even makes it more of a reason to use loops whenever you can instead of doing copy and paste. But we've kind of glazed over this loop variable. We kind of described it in the first video that this was part of the syntax, that it's the word for, a loop variable, the word in, and then a range. But what's actually happening with this variable? So I'm going to introduce a new Python command called print, which will simply display the value of times to the screen. So we can see here we got values 0, 1, and 2. So this loop variable is actually assuming these values as the loop is repeating. Now we already know that the loop's going to repeat 3 times because of that number that's there in the range. Let's go ahead and change this. Let's change it to 5. And as you can see here, we got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3, 4, not 5. And that is 5 numbers. That's a very common misconception for students who are first learning Python, is that they're actually going to get the number 5. Remember, the range is going to produce numbers starting at 0. And from 0 to 4 is 5 numbers. All right, so that's a key thing to remember. Now, because this is just a number, we can do something with it. We could possibly add to it. Now, at this point, I want you to think of it just as a regular math problem where you're simply going to substitute values in. So this comma with the print statement is simply going to allow me to print another value next to it. So let's see, we already know that the values of times will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. We saw that. What happens when we add 5 to each of these? So if I add 5 to 0, it should be 5. If I add 5 to 1, it should be 6, and so on. Let's see. And there we go. So what the plus 5 has done, it's effectively allowed us to shift the numbers that get produced. We still get 5 numbers, and the loop variable is still starting at 0. The times is still 0, but the effect of what's getting displayed is 5 more than that because we're adding 5. Now, another common operation we can do as it pertains to designing stuff with the turtle is to then multiply. So I'm going to multiply by 10. So let's take a look at it. Now, we're not multiplying the second number by 10. We're multiplying times, because it's times times 10. So if I do 0 times 10, we should get 0. And then 1 times 10 should be 10. And then 2 times 10 should be 20. Again, this is just following through, just taking the numbers of times, and then performing the appropriate mathematical operation with it. All right, so there we go. So we can see here, we've taken the number and we've exploded it. It's on a much larger scale. So notice they're essentially the same numbers here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, set multiplied by 10. Now we could go a step further. in that we can multiply the number and add to it. So at this point, if you kind of think about it, we're really, well, depends on how you want to look at it. We'll take this last column and we're simply adding 5 to it. So for the first number, it should be 5. The next number, because it's 1 times 10 is 10, 10 plus 5 is 15, so we should get 15 here. And then here we should get 25. Again, the easiest thing might be to simply look at the last column, realizing that that's 10 times times 10, and then simply add 5 to this column. And again, at this point, you might be thinking, okay, great, so what? What can we do with this? These are just a bunch of numbers. Well, let's use bob.circle as an exploration of what we can do with this loop variable. And now let's simply put the variable times. So if you recall, the number that gets placed inside circle represents the radius. So if we're taking this first column, we're going to produce, actually let's produce, well, let me also do this. Actually, let's leave it at 5. I was going to do a bob.speed and make it go bigger, which I might do as the last example. So we're simply taking these numbers in the first column, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and use it as a radius. So I want you to have a mental picture here before I run it. We're going to get 5 circles. We know that because the loop's going to repeat 5 times. But the circles aren't always going to be the same size. There's your 0, there's your 1, there's your 2, there's your 3. And the nice thing is because we were doing it as part of a loop and it takes time for it to draw, we actually saw the values being displayed here in the console. Well, that circle's not that great. So let's do a plus 5. And hopefully you can appreciate doing a plus 5 isn't going to change the way it looks much. It's still going to be tiny because now instead of 0 to 4, we're doing 5 to 9. Again, very small numbers as compared to the size of our screen. But you did notice that the first circle was bigger, but they're still very tight. Let's see what happens with the times 10. Now this will be a significant change. Reason being, notice that the first circle is 0, so you're going to see it spin, but it's not going to draw anything. But the next circle has a radius of 10. That's about double the size of this one, since we know that this one was 5 from the previous example. And there's going to be 20, 30, 40, 50. And this is where incorporating the loop variable becomes a lot nicer. Now I'm going to increase this a little bit more. Let's say 8. And now what I'm going to do, notice that with the first circle, we don't actually get anything because it's a value of 0. So let's add 5 to it. Or, you know what? Let's change it on the fly. Let's add 10. And then we could also see the numbers in the last column. Oops, forgot to change this to 10. So it's not reflecting what we actually doing. So let's run that one more time. So I want you to make the connection between the numbers here and then the size of the circle. So that's a 10, a 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. All right. So by doing this, we were able to change the size of the circle each time we went through a loop. And there's so many other things you can do with this loop variable. But the important thing to note, again, reviewing from the chart here, is that this variable has a value as you go through it. In the previous videos, we haven't taken advantage of that value, but we will in this video and in future videos. The other thing to note too is that it doesn't have to be the word times. This is just a variable. So I could do number. Let me do a little copy and paste here, make my life easier. And just to run it again. Honestly, that variable is whatever you want, just like we've done variables in the past. Again, it's some identifier of the information that's there. So usually, number, times, you might see some websites use the variable I, just a single letter. Whatever it is, as long as you know that this is the loop variable and this is what you're doing to the loop variable and this is how you're using the loop variable. I'm going to run it one more time just to prove to you that changing the variable doesn't change the outcome. because we're still got the same process. It's just that we're using a different variable to represent that information. All right, so let's go back to our presentation and let's review what we've done. So in this video, we took a deeper dive into the for loop and looked into the loop variable, that it's a variable that has values dependent on the range. Now, when you have a range of, let's say, 5, you actually get the numbers 0 to 4 because the range always starts at the value of 0. So 0 to 4 is 5 numbers. Again, if you need proof, count it on your fingers. And then we saw how we can manipulate that value through some simple arithmetic operations and then use that value as part of our design to create some really nice things, such as circles that increase in size as the loop goes on. So hopefully you're excited about being able to use that loop variable as part of your design, and enjoy.